I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Like I said, we've been doing this for 5 years. This is episode like 227 or something like that. We've done a number of these. It is a unique opportunity to get Matt here. It's difficult for the agency to agree to allow this type of participation, so I'm thankful that Matt has been able to join us. And these three guys I've known I've known all these guys for quite a long time, and I feel grateful that I can call them all friends and colleagues, and I've been looking forward to this. So I do want to say we are coming to you from Round the Bend Steakhouse, the home of the Testicle Festival. I just wanted to say that desperately and get it recorded for posterity.
And we're in the ballroom.
We're actually in the ballroom, and Dylan and Cam, who are the producers, you've met them. They've been in the back. They are bringing back a sack of, for Pat, the boss back at this studio. I forget it. Sorry, Mom. And so we're going to just go ahead and get started. We don't have a ton of time. I thought a topic that might be interesting to everybody that we can all kind of commiserate on would be, over the last few years, the agency's had a fairly intense focus on heat and heat-related illness. And I'm just curious, I would ask the guys first, we have a general contractor, we have a subcontractor, we have a loss control specialist, and then we have the head of the agency here in Nebraska. We'll let Matt kind of bat cleanup, as Sheila said, but what have you learned about heat over the last 3 years or so as far as management of heat? What are you doing well? And what are you still struggling with? So if you wouldn't mind, Alex, I'm going to ask you to start.
For us, heat's obviously a really big issue in roofing. The bulk of our roofing operations in White Castle now come in commercial, so low-slope operations, and you can't really do much roofing at night, so you got to find ways to work during the day. Usually during the heat of summer, we start 5 o'clock in the morning in commercial if we can. Otherwise, we just shorten our days. When I've done spot checks and temperatures, whether it's wet bulb globe or surface temps, I've found surface temps on a black rubber roof as high as 185 degrees. And then holding a handheld weather meter, I've found air temperatures about 140 degrees. So heat is a huge issue for us. There's not much we can do to mitigate it other than we work on acclimatization really well, so we don't send guys right out into the field right away. We give guys water, and we switched to providing bottled water this year instead of jug water, just for ease and making sure everybody has access to water, getting pop-up tents for shade, and then managing end of daytime. So if it's going to be over 90 degrees and wet bulb globe temp over about 87, 88, I start pulling guys off the roof at the very least, if not out of the field for the day.
As it's approaching those temperatures?
Yep.
And so are you relying on any technology to help you with some pre-notification of these heat waves and things that we're going to be dealing with and managing?
Yep. So we've tried a couple different weather systems and weather services, apps, and that sort of thing. A lot of it comes down to me. The other hat I wear in Lancaster County is I'm with the Office of Emergency Management there, so I'm kind of a weather nerd. So I stay on top of the weather and kind of give guys heads up on the days going out. And so in the mornings, I'll send out a group text message to every field employee and superintendents being like, hey, reminder, drink your water, keep an eye on the other guys. I have a handheld Kestrel wet bulb globe temperature, so I can do spot checks from where I'm at. And then the new AIHA app, weather app, has a really good wet bulb globe tool that you can set your like your clothing parameters, your work parameters, and then location-based, just like any other weather app that can show what the wet bulb globe temperature and start doing your work rest cycles right on the app, and then share that with
So that is an AIHA app?
It just came out midsummer this year.
Okay, interesting. Are you guys familiar with that? Or you have seen that one? That might be worth looking into. That's interesting.
Yep, it just came out, and I don't think they publicized it really well.
Okay.
But the data on it's really good. I found it a lot better than we demoed a couple really expensive weather apps and programs that I found were several degrees off. When I'm doing spot checks, they're not anywhere close to what their app says. So I'm not going to rely on their data. I'm going to find something that works best for us.
Interesting.
What's the one that you're using now, Alex, look like compared to, obviously, real time, right? You said it's a little bit different. There's some deviation there, but what does that look like, that app versus the OSHA NIOSH Heat Index app?
This one actually uses a lot more of the science behind it. The NIOSH one relies a lot more on the heat index. The AIHA one relies directly on the wet bulb globe temp. I don't know where they get their data from, but I found the numbers line up a lot closer to what they actually are versus the NIOSH one. And then the fact that you can, so when you set your location base, you can set like what type of work you are, if it's like light work, moderate work, heavy work, your PPE levels and that sort of thing. So it'll actually specifically tell you how often you need to be taking rest breaks and that sort of thing too.
Interesting. That's kind of based on that old ACGIH guidance, it sounds like. Interesting. Okay. Casey, I mean, as a general contractor, this must be a nightmare for you, man. What are you guys doing?
Just making sure everybody has all that information. We post everything in the trailer. We use the NIOSH, the heat tool.
Using that one, yeah.
Yep. And just mainly training.
Yeah. And then how do you, well, I mean, like anything that you're responsible for on a site, you're kind of running roughshod over these subs. How are you getting them to buy into this? Or I guess you don't really care whether they buy in or not, do you?
No, everybody needs to buy in. I wish we had more Alexes on the job site, to be honest. But, some of the things are pretty tough to accomplish there, making sure you have that much water on the job site for the people. I forgot how many gallons you need a day, but
it depends on what part of the standard you read. Do you read at the beginning or the end?
Right.
Because the beginning says unlimited, and then towards the end it says
Talks about a quart an hour or something.
Reasonable for the anticipated workload, right? And then once you do the calculation,
But that could be quite a bit of water.
Yeah, that's why we went to the bottled water, because in order for us to give them adequate water per day for a 5-man crew, it basically came out to 12 gallons for an 8 to 10 hour day.
Per guy?
For the whole crew.
Oh, for the crew, I'm sorry.
You need, that's 2.5 5-gallon jugs.
it's almost a flat of water per
And
person.
it's not feasible. And then trying to do the sanitation schedule, that's why we switched to bottled water. Because
Plus, you got to bring about 12 satellites onto this site for 5 guys drinking that much water.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Got to get the big military water buffaloes.
I mean, Ezra, what are you seeing? I mean, you see a lot of different companies, a lot of different job sites, indoors and outdoors. The new proposed standard applies both indoors and outdoors. So what have you seen that is working, and where are we struggling?
I think the biggest hurdle, right, is getting that acclimation piece fitted for that company, right? Because when you look at the CDC recommendations, we're not working, right? When it gets north of 90, nobody's working. Well, when we're down in Texas, that's 7 o'clock in the morning, so nobody's working. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So it's just kind of figuring out the workarounds. Do we have the ability to, obviously depending on where they come from, right, that employee, and what time of year for acclimation, what kind of year do we have, right? Do we have the ability to stretch that out? But looking at PPE levels, right? Some of Casey's guys are going to have different levels than what Alex's guys are going to have. Do they have the ability to wear a sun shirt, right? The guys that fish know what I'm talking about. They make those in high vis, but do we have the ability to wear that based off of the type of work that we're doing, right? Am I doing hot work or not? And really trying to, juggle that and talk to the guys, right? So there's the training piece of it. Educating people on how to hydrate, right? Because we can only control what happens from when I punch in to when I punch out. But guess what happens when they punch out?
Yeah.
Time to have a survey start at 7, right?
Sure.
So we can't control what they do after work. So trying to feed that hydration. So I really push the elements, the liquid IVs, the electrolytes, right? Drinking pickle juice and eating bananas, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the shade thing is the one that I see oftentimes people fail the most at, right? It's a great branding opportunity. Go get your tents branded, the umbrellas for the horizontal bores, the stuff that drives on the side of the road, get the umbrellas branded, right? But nobody's bringing as much shade as they probably should. More specifically, like the road crews, the guys who are kind of job hopping, they're not bringing that stuff with, right? I did an inspection with the company kind of when this first rolled out, and I said, all right, what's your shade plan? I'm like, we're going to use the vehicle. And I'm thinking, like, no, that's probably not a great idea, but okay, we'll kind of see where this goes. They had a new employee. They had a more veteran employee, and then an even more veteran employee than that. Well, obviously the one with the most seniority, he had to leave to go back to the shop to get whatever, right, in the one vehicle that they brought. So now my shade and my air conditioning is no longer a factor. Right. So that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, thank you.
we're getting ready to start a job in Texas. So we're going to have a carports down there. with fans going in them all the time, and then have ice on the big ice machines available for anybody on the job site who needs the ice.
And just out of curiosity, what do you think that's costing you?
Wow.
I mean, do you have any idea?
No, carports are cheap. Fans are pretty cheap.
Okay.
You know, I don't know how 50 pounds of ice a day.
Well, in the whole scheme of things, they're cheap.
Right. I couldn't tell you a dollar figure. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
We just need it down there.
You need it.
It's going to be hot.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be 96 degrees on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. In October.
Yeah. I've had like 12 people offer me football tickets all of a sudden because nobody wants to go sit in the heat, you know. Nobody ever offers me it when it's 75 degrees, but
I only take them if they're behind the glass. With
Yeah.
the AC going.
Yeah. Well, Matt, even when I was back with the agency, they had rolled out the water, rest, shade mantra. That's, when you and I were working together, that was kind of the extent of it. And there was a little bit of guidance, but the agency has obviously really invested a lot in this. There's a proposed standard, and so most of you have probably read the proposed standard. If you haven't, you probably should. It seems likely to me that it will actually be promulgated at some point here in the near future. So, but just on your observations, you and your team, what are you seeing that people are doing well? I mean, and are people still struggling, obviously? So if you wouldn't mind, just some of your thoughts on this.
Well, Doug, you're right. We go back to water, rest, shade. That goes back 25 years.
Yeah.
Nothing has really changed with regards to the basic premise behind how to protect yourself from really hot weather. Heat's nothing new to the human species. We've been dealing with heat on this planet every summer, cyclically, for eons. So the idea that, oh my gosh, this is something new, it's far from. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's done work outside in the summer understands that hydration is the key to this whole concept of how do you keep somebody safe when they're working outdoors. It's really, the comment that was made a second ago by Ezra with regards to, is a sunshade going to be enough? What if it's a vehicle? And how does that impact you? I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that if you're not in a crisis stage yet, sure, retreating to the shade is definitely the way to go. But you also have to have a plan for when somebody does move into a crisis stage. If they are starting to have some form of heat illness that's setting in, just getting into the shade may not be enough. You may actually have to get them to an air-conditioned climate where the body temperature can decrease at a more rapid rate, because otherwise you might have something further develop, as far as the brain is concerned. The new standard coming out, there's folks, I'm sure it's like any other topic, you'll find some folks who move to the positive side and some folks who move to the negative side. And I'm one of those folks that when it comes to something like an OSHA standard versus the general duty clause, which is where heat has been living for quite some time, if we have heat issues, we've had people die in Nebraska from heat exposure issues, where OSHA has issued citations. We had one a few years ago that was actually a willful citation. The thing that having a standard does is it gives everybody something they can look at and say, okay, now we understand, here's the parameters that we have to work within. When it's a general duty clause issue, you've got the national consensus standards, you've got industry practices, you have all these other elements that come into play that not everyone may be familiar with or know how to go research. Everybody now is a Google MD, so you can go online and figure out, here's the effects the heat will have on me physiologically, if X, Y, or Z is occurring. But with a standard, you can at least sit back and say, okay, here's what I need to do. The standard that's coming out is basically, it's got 2 trigger points, and I think that's a really important distinction for everyone to understand. You mentioned it's indoor and outdoor. With those 2 trigger points, the 80-degree and the 90-degree differentiation, the big thing to understand is that the 90-degree point, you're now mandated to give a break, 15 minutes every 2 hours. That is something that's that hasn't existed in the PAC. It's kind of been an as-needed take a break kind of thing. So we're now mandating the break aspect of water, rest, and shade. Water, everybody, it's one of those things where how much is enough? Well, each person consumes and perspires at a different rate. So understanding how much water somebody has to take in. I'm a bigger guy. So when I'm out there and I start sweating, the natural bigger guy kicks in, and I'm losing a lot more. So I have to take in a lot more. So that's when we start talking about how much is enough. It may never be enough. You may have somebody hooked up to a hose and continually drinking water and perspiring at the same rate they're taking it in. So you have to evaluate that as part of your program to make sure you understand, here's what my people can tolerate, and here's what we need to do to make sure that we're not putting them into a dangerous situation. So I guess it's kind of important to understand with the emphasis that the agency has put on heat over the last couple of years, numerically, it's when we start quantifying things, that's one of the best ways to understand the importance of this. And Dan was kind enough to, Dan's the compliance system specialist for OSHA in Nebraska. He was kind enough to run some stats for me. And because, everybody
Did you say,
stats.
Dan, run some stats for me?
Pretty close. I said, Dan, I need some stats on heat. Can you get that for me, stat? And he said, I'll get that for you. Since 2022, the agency has run approximately 8,300 inspections involving heat.
Wow.
So it's not a tiny amount. And if you just focus on construction, 4,000 of those have been in construction, 4,092 actually. So it's been a very even breakdown between the two primary industries that we deal with, construction and general industry. And that's why that indoor aspect comes into play. So I guess if I'm going to wrap up a quick Matt's take on heat, the best thing to do is if you're in a company and you've got employees, we all understand the most basic thing that we have to do as the folks that are in the safety and health professions is to sit back, take a look, and say, what are the things that are most dangerous to my people in the particular industry that they're doing? And that hazard analysis is always going to be the key that tells us what steps we need to take. Sometimes that triggers an OSHA standard that has additional steps like training and other things. And other times it comes down to, okay, I got to use my professional judgment because there may not be very clear guidance. Machine guarding is a great example. 1910-212A1. It just says guard everything. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It doesn't tell you when to. Well, it does tell you when to do it, but it doesn't really.
Degree.
It does. It does, but it doesn't sit down and say, well, if you're working with this piece of equipment, here's how you guard it. You're supposed to go do that research yourself and figure out what the best possible way of preventing somebody from coming into contact with the dangerous points are. Heat's no different. You've got to look at the environment you're working in and figure out what the best way is for you to comply with what is essentially a standard in promulgation. And let's say it fails to go through, and we're still in the general duty clause world. That's not going to change what we're doing today. We're still going to be trying to take care of people, and if OSHA sees that somebody is failing to protect their employees from heat hazards, doesn't matter if it's on a foundry deck, it doesn't matter if it's in a fast food restaurant, and it doesn't matter if you're on a roof at a construction site. We're still going to be expecting folks to go out there and do what they're supposed to do to protect their folks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I do think, whether it goes through or not, I think the foundation that has been laid in the proposed standard is useful. I think that's always useful. I think formalizing your program is important. I think many of us still have kind of just verbalized, oh, we're going to do this if it gets hot kind of programs, and those become really variable and dependent on different factors. And so just formalizing something, where we have those triggers in place I think it's useful to some degree. So, yeah, whether or not this actually becomes an enforced regulation, I think there are things that are good in there that we can pull from and adopt. But this is something I find so interesting. There's so many variables to this and how people are affected by heat. Whether it's because of, what they do in the time that they're not at work, or the amount of sleep that they do or don't get, or maybe even pharmaceuticals that you're taking that have certain correlation to heat impact. I mean, all sorts of variables. So I think Alex mentioned that, maybe you did as well, Casey, but the training piece of this is really critical to the, recognizing symptoms and trying to address these things early and not, I've always said that one of the biggest challenges that we have is ego, trying to, push yourself, I'm okay, push yourself through when you perhaps shouldn't, and getting people to acknowledge that is really difficult. So I think it'll be interesting. I guess, do you have any insider information on if and when this is going to happen?
Well, I can tell you it's open for public comment right now, and the public comment closes at the end of December.
Okay.
So, as far as the promulgation process goes, that means we're one step closer to finalizing a standard. So I don't know if any of you are aware of that or have ever participated in that, but if you do have comments, now is the time.
Yeah, please give them, right?
And please, I think the agency is sincere in wanting those comments. And at least in my experience, certainly Matt could add to this, but I think they do consider those comments, probably, evaluate whether or not these things are feasible, or so it's worth taking the time to do if you can.
Well, you guys are the folks that do the job every day. So if there's something that you read that you think is going to be an impediment, that's a legitimate impediment to your ability to be able to do the job, it's important that you go ahead and verbalize that and get that out there. OSHA's website has a link that you can go to actually go to the forum for providing comment, and make sure that your voice is heard in that regard, so that if there is something that one of the folks at OSHA or one of the teams that was involved in developing the standard did not take into account, they can look at that and say, oh, okay, well, that's a legitimate concern. We may have to do something to modify this either for or against what we're currently doing, so that it is something that's viable in the end product. Nobody wants to see an OSHA standard or any regulatory entity put out something that is not practical and that can't actually be utilized. You want everything to be value added, and if OSHA comes up with a standard that's not value added and no one comments in the process to say, hey, this could really hinder something, how is the agency supposed to know they need to fix that, or be able to provide the rationale for why that decision was made to add that particular paragraph into the standard? So it's important that people do speak up and say, hey, I have a voice in this. I want my voice to be heard, and here's why I think this is a concern. Or, the other side of that is some people in public comment come back and say, we 100% agree with this. We think it's a great idea, and thanks for putting it in play. So, there's two sides to the coin, and we need to make sure that both sides of that coin, as you flip it, whichever way it lands, heads or tails, you're saying your piece.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's important. Any comments? Any questions that you would like to ask? Obviously, we don't have a regulation yet, so...
Matt, if there's 3 things that you could quantify from the heat inspections that you guys have done, generalizing, what are you seeing? Good, bad? What are we? Obviously, we're citing GDC, but what is it program related? Is it training related? Is it? Can we put those in buckets?
They're not doing anything? Is that? I mean, yeah.
Well, you've got a category of folks that aren't doing anything, and they operate from a position of ignorance in that regard. And some of them are for places you wouldn't expect. One of the things that we've noticed is that we've had quite a few complaints that have come from indoor areas that we wouldn't have anticipated someone complaining in. If you say to me, hey, where's a hot place where people work inside?
Yankee Hill Brig.
Foundries, where you've got kilns, where you've got all kinds of apparatus that are designed for heating, like a bakery or something like that. That's what I was expecting. But what I found is it's convenience stores, fast food, that kind of things, where people are working next to a vat of oil. Or, who would have ever thought that if you're grilling hamburgers that the top of the stove is going to generate heat? So that zone around where you're cooking gets quite a bit hotter. Well, people are complaining about that. And with a trigger temperature of 80 degrees, when it comes out that, hey, if your workplace is hotter than 80 degrees, you should contact OSHA and let them know. Well, we've got a lot of folks that work in environments where most of the facility is below 80 degrees, but in the kitchen, it's warmer. And so they're complaining about the temperatures in the kitchen. So I said that's one of the things that was probably a little bit of a, I didn't expect that moment. You asked me to come up with 3 things, and honestly right now off the top of my head I can't say, oh my gosh, here's 3 things. But I have been pleasantly surprised by the number of folks that do understand the importance. And it's industry driven. You go out into the construction world, people have a very good understanding of how hot it gets. And just look back at the basic practices that people have been using over the years. When it starts to get hot and you hit that point in the summer where that when the sun hits its apex, it's not going to be safe to work outside, people shift their work hours. They start coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning and they cut off by 3. So that industry has always had a pretty good understanding of, the hotter it gets, the more dangerous it is for our people to work. So there's been really not too much of a surprise when it comes to, the folks that generally work outdoors. A third item would probably be willingness. When people hear what they need to do, a lot of the industry professionals understand that, okay, this is a step we need to take, and it may not be something we've dealt with in the past, but we need to go ahead and make some changes so that our workplaces are safer. Because, the good thing is with folks that, we all came out of COVID, and one of the things that I think a lot of folks have now come to recognize is the importance of having people around to actually be able to accomplish the job. We shut everything down for quite some time, and we tried to work remotely, and we tried to do all these different things to keep the machine moving forward. But when you don't have those folks in the facility to make the widgets, to process the widgets, to send them out the door, to process payroll and all those different things. You have a new understanding of the importance of your people. And I think that, just my own observation is that more people are willing now to take care of the staff they have because of how difficult it is to keep people on board, and that not too distant memory of what it's like to not have enough people to keep the doors open on a business. So people are more willing to take the steps and do the things they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And spend that little bit of extra money for that equipment that makes the workplace just that much better. And when you compare it to the overall scheme of things, you look at one injury where somebody goes to the hospital and let's say they've had a heat stress issue or a heat stroke issue, how much money that's going to cost and the time away and the impact it has on the rest of your staff, because there's a psychological impact that takes place there as well. Spending that little bit of extra money to bring in the bottled water, to make sure there's an air-conditioned place for them to retreat to when it gets too hot, paying for a 15-minute break every 2 hours as opposed to maybe one 15-minute break in the morning and one 15-minute break in the evening or afternoon. People are starting to understand that little investment pays much larger dividends in the end. So there's my 3 items.
No, and I think it is interesting because I do think this is you're somewhat singing to the choir, because as you said, this group, and particularly people that come to these meetings, understand this. They've been dealing with it for years and years and years, and they've come up with reasonable ways to adapt to those hazards and those stresses on their employees. But I do think it'll be interesting. We should perhaps know something in, maybe by December we'll have some idea when it first came down
the pipe, all the employers that I talked to are all worried about it. And I'm like, well, if you're a good employer and you care about your people, you're doing what you need to do anyways. It's just not formal, right? So I think everybody got and is still overly concerned about it. Right now we start putting some parameters on it, but for the most part, I would agree. Right, everybody's been doing a fashion,
and this will give them some help, I think, too.
Needed to do for a long time.
Interesting topic. I think we're going to move on from that topic unless anybody has a question they would like to pose. Something that's always interesting to me, and with this group, testicle anyone? With this group, I am interested as an old man who is at the twilight of his career. I'm interested in technology and how you are utilizing technology. And I would be interested to hear how the agency is utilizing technologies, You and I were drawing stick figure diagrams back when we were in the field, man. So things have come a long way. But Alex, I know you are really interested and involved in this. And I had a young man on my podcast about 2 months ago who talked about utilizing AI in safety. It was fascinating. In fact, that's when I decided it was time for me to retire, when he started talking about, I do all my industrial hygiene assessments on ChatGPT, and it outlines all, my strategy. It tells me what to sample, and I just upload my data sheets, and I was like, I'm done. I'm out, So if you wouldn't mind, if there's anything that you're using, I know you do a lot of interesting things, technology-wise, anything that you would share that
we had a serious injury in Colorado through about a month ago, and when OSHA came out to do their investigation, he flew a drone over and started mapping and taking measurements with his drone. Because it was a...
Did he have his license?
He did. He was actually has a he has his own side business doing it too. But it was fascinating to watch because it was a really technical. It was a large mountain home in Telluride, so it was not feasible to get up there and climb around and measure. So he flew his drone up there and was able to map and measure everything from the ground.
Interesting.
Did the measurements match drawing?
As far as I know, yeah. I don't get to see all of them, but everything seemed pretty.
But this was the OSHA compliance person.
And so to me, you see usually the government's last to catch on. And he flew. He was pretty open. He said, "Do you mind if I fly?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got no reason not to. No reason to hide anything." And I think it was even the crew was kind of sitting there fascinated watching it fly around, and know that. We've used it for here and there for media and that sort of stuff, and I think that's one of those things that we're going to try and get into is that sort of thing, is using drone technology for mapping so we can do time mapping into blueprints and that sort of thing, especially when we're doing large commercial projects where we're worried about tapers on flat roofs on that side, and then on my side just for imaging and measuring sites. So like I was telling you earlier, we're doing a really technical job site where in Omaha, where trying to find the right fall protection system for that job site was very difficult. And what ended up actually really working is the general contractor used drone images, and we're able to, so we had a whiteboard, we had drone images superimposed so we could draw exactly what system we needed to use for each roof, so it wasn't just guesswork.
Interesting. And any other technologies that you've incorporated? Anything?
Well, I am experimenting with the training program with our guys through, I think it's called Safety Culture, and it uses AI. So I can literally give it a prompt like, hey, give me a training program for slips, trips, and falls, and it will write a 20-minute training thing that I can send to people's phones, and then can track it and send, like, so it includes the presentation and a quiz dynamic to it, and then it'll send it back to you. So I can either take prepackaged ones from ASSP or create whatever one I want. And it was within seconds, you had a full training multimedia presentation that can be sent to a mobile device.
How many digits are you talking, dollar-wise?
I think it was $60 per person per year. But with as much growing as we've had at White Castle, trying to find that, because we've got guys.
It's $5 a month.
Yeah, three time zones at this point, basically doing jobs. So getting everybody together once a month isn't feasible anymore. So that's definitely one of the things I'm considering. And just when I sat there just playing with it and was able to create a whole training thing that normally would take a normal safety person a couple hours to put together a PowerPoint and quiz and everything, it did it in seconds. It's maximizing time.
And the more detail that you put into it, the more detailed the training that it will prepare for you. So if you can put job-specific information in there, it's going to give you much more detail. Images,
everything. It spit out a whole presentation with all sorts of images and videos and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't want to give away my consultant secrets, but, people call me and say, I need a program for something, and I just tell them, you could write a program off of the free version of ChatGPT in the time that it's taken for this phone call. And it'll be much more articulate than I could produce and just as accurate. This was Ben Thornburg down at Drake Williams Steel was talking about this and how they utilize it. And, he was talking about how they were setting up, industrial hygiene sampling protocols based on the uploading safety data sheets. They did a ventilation survey on one of their projects where he just put in fan speeds and the dimensions of the room, and it told them, how many air changes per hour they're going to need based on the concentration of the air contaminants. I was just like, oh my God, it's a brave new world. I'm out. I'm done. So, Casey?
Yeah, I thought
you're a technology guy.
A little bit.
Yeah.
We're looking at doing QR codes on the job site. So as soon as somebody comes to the job site, they can scan the QR code. There'll be a site orientation in English and Spanish. All of our pre-task plan stuff's going to be in there. Safety data sheets. It should be a one-stop shop. So if you got any questions at all, you go to the QR code.
So the QR code takes you to a landing page that has all of that stuff, or are you going to individual?
Right now it just goes to one spot, but it's in pilot right now. But eventually it'll be site-specific.
I love it. I've seen a lot of that. I think it's fantastic. The immediate access. I've seen QR codes. I go into facilities all the time, and literally the facilities on the back of the door in the restroom, they'll have QR codes with different information. You can just scan a code, and you can get incident report forms. You can get data sheets. You can get anything that you would want. SDSs. I've seen them on toolboxes. I've seen them on, the entrance points, like you said. I think that get the job orientation as you come onto the site. I just think it's fantastic. I really like it. So are you doing that, or do you have?
No, we're doing that internally.
Okay.
It's not AI, but I need to look into that, I guess.
It's remarkable, and you're a tech guy too, man. I know you're a tech guy.
That far.
What are you seeing, or what are you recommending, or what are you seeing your clients using that has been interesting to you?
A little bit of the QR stuff, a little bit of the drone stuff, right? A little bit of the AI, but not a ton, right? We talk about documentation, especially in the safety space, right? Document this. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Do these things. Well, if I can digitize it, and everybody has a smartphone now. If you don't, you do, right? So getting on there and tracking that and doing machine startups and, talking all industries now, right? But getting the machine startup procedure down, or I need to do lockout tag out. Here's scan this code for that, and it can it can run you through that. We can track clicks, right? They can do it on emails, right? Like, how long did you look at that? How long did you look at this PowerPoint? How much time you spent on this slide? Like, we can do that now. We can do that and prove training retention, and I think that we're just getting into the wild world of technology and safety. But at the end of the day, it's all about dollars, right? Mm-hmm. We got to quantify, right? That's why I asked Alex how much it costs. Well, when we do the math, it's relatively inexpensive, right? So, getting over the initial dollar sign hurdle, I think for most folks, right, is the biggest thing, right? So trainings on your phones, you can track that completion. It'll auto email. It's endless opportunities, right? So.
And just managing that level of documentation. If you're doing inspections, if you're doing PMs, if you're doing anything, that has required paper, a checklist or something in the past, powered industrial truck inspections, dailies, or whatever you're doing, to be able to capture all of that electronically and manage it in one place, be able to go sort it, maybe even.
And as a safety manager, right, everything's time-stamped. So, all right, I see Billy driving down the aisle on a forklift, or this guy's driving this scissor lift across the deal, and it's 3:27, and I get on the app or get into the application, and I look, and I don't have a form completed yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, and then we have the opportunity to jumble the questions in the order and toggle yes and no, pass and fail, opposite. They're all different sophistication levels, right? But that way we can't just sit there and click, 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 click.
Right.
Or put the line under okay or yes.
Right.
Like, come on, dude. You clear, even if you individually check the box, we'd still know you pencil whipped it, but it looks better than the line, right? So
yeah,
I think it's going to be some cool stuff.
I think so too. Matt, you guys are you eavesdropping on us? You guys have caller ID now?
They got tablets now.
But you guys have used drones, have you not?
So our office has a drone. We have utilized it in the field. We had an incident at an ethanol refinery, and we were able to use the drone at the refinery to fly into the area where the incident occurred. It was elevated, so seeing what had happened and being able to look at how the tank had opened up and all these other aspects that would be very difficult to look at without putting on a harness and lanyard, getting into
putting somebody at risk,
and generally putting somebody minimized risk. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Being able to use that drone and fly it into that location and not have to sit there and think, okay, can you scoot a little closer to this and get a closer view of X without having to think about, is this going to be dangerous? Do I have to worry about other people? Is there something that we have to worry about with the facility that could be a problem? But because we had to bring a piece of equipment in. The drones are fairly, they're benign as far as their impact to a job site. So being able to utilize the drone was great. And yes, we do go through a process where you go through Part 107 to get licensed. So there's an FAA test that has to be taken by your drone pilots. I'm actually going through the school right now myself because it looks kind of fun to fly a drone.
Right. All of a sudden I'm interested again.
Right. So there are drawbacks. They have batteries. They only fly for X amount of time. And then you learn when you go through a Part 107 course that there are some restrictions and limitations for where you can fly, how high you can fly. And they vary depending upon where you are. And you literally have to learn how to read the same map a pilot would use for flying an aircraft. Because that gives you all your topographical data and what your elevations are and all that fun stuff. So
interesting.
No, the drones they're great. We used to joke about this years ago, the virtual inspection, where imagine the day where we just have somebody walk around with their laptop open and the camera facing out. COSHO wouldn't even go to the job site, and you just have a guy walk around and say, "No, pan it to the left a little." And now we're almost there, where we're doing all this stuff virtually and interacting with folks in ways that we never thought of. The agency is, the government in general is usually a little bit behind, and I'll use a little bit behind as a kind phrase, what the corporate world actually does when it comes to technology. We're kind of when it comes to non-DOD application, where we see the stuff trickle down eventually. So I'm happy to see things. Not like we're paperless with our case files, which is something that up until 2022, we were still documenting everything on paper and shipping paper to a central storage location for years of storage and disposal and whatnot. So we've gone paperless on all that. And those tablets that you were commenting about earlier, look, Dan has a tablet. We can access all of our case files on that thing from anywhere now, as long as we have web access, and we're all carrying phones, and we all have our ability to get onto the web now through that. So it has changed quite a bit, and I'm operating in a world that I don't feel as archaic as it once was. We almost feel like, hey, we're kind of working like people back in the 90s now. This is great. I'm being facetious somewhat.
It's progress, though, man. It's progress.
It is. It's changed things. And hearing that, when we go out and do an inspection, you go to a job site like Casey's got running, or you see a roofing company that's doing something where they're using their phones and they're pulling apps and they're QR coding, and they're saying, okay, that takes me to our website, and it says, oh, here we go. I got to call this person, let them know we're getting ready to go up on a roof. So, hey, we got a crew working at elevation now. Knowing that they're using these tools, and they're using those tools to make their job sites safer. And, ultimately, if you look at OSHA, everyone points the finger and says, oh, my gosh, those guys, they come out, they issue citations, they're here to take the money. I mentioned this to you earlier. The funny thing about an OSHA citation is we don't show up at your job site with a bag full of hazards and dump them on the floor and then go, okay, here we go. We're going to cite these 7 things that we just dumped on the floor. Those things existed before we arrive. So it's up to the employer and whoever they designate as their safety person to identify those things and take care of those before we ever get there. And the more you empower your people to help identify those hazards and point them out, I don't care if it's heat, I don't care if it's possible technology solutions that you could use to make your job site better, your workplace better, however you want to phrase it. It's kind of you have to have that team concept, but ultimately somebody has to say yes or no, and somebody's responsible for implementing these things. That's the person I talk to. So it's good to see that people are starting to open their eyes and recognize that we can do things better, and there are so many different avenues that we can explore to make things better. And technology is just another one of those tools that, we always used to talk about, what kind of tools do you have in your tool bag? We've gotten to the point now we're driving tool trucks. There's so many options that you slide open a back door and he's like, all right, what are we going to use today to make this place a little bit better than it was yesterday?
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about technology and about a couple apps. I'm curious, what apps are people using out there to make your job safer? Is there any apps you guys use on a daily basis?
Safety culture that's something that you mentioned, isn't it, Alex? Anybody else? Anybody using anything that you think, man, this is really making my life better?
OSHA's Heat Index, is that an IOSH app?
Alex, you're using Company Cam also?
Yep. It was developed by White Castle. So Company Cam was developed through White Castle, through one of the brothers Mike Anta started. The brothers took it over. Luke created Company Cam, and that's.
Can you high level that for these guys?
Company Cam is essentially combining your estimating site inspection tool with Facebook. So sales guy shows up on a job site, starts taking pictures of everything we're going to sell, whether it's a shingled house or a big construction job. And then once the sales guy goes back, so you have all these time-stamped and GPS-located pictures of what you want, then the crew goes out there and they take daily pictures of their progress. The site as it sits. Superintendent goes out there, can take pictures of everything. I go out there as safety. I can go take pictures of anything I find on there. On the back end, it's all sent right to the cloud. So I can sit on my computer and I can watch as the pictures pop up. And when they can take a picture of that guy's not wearing a rope, I can then comment on that picture and tag him, and it immediately notifies him that, hey, put your rope on. So everything is time-stamped and date and GPS located. So when you show up at a job, you can either create a new job or log into the one that's already there, and so that we can communicate. And it works really good with bilingual because you can comment in Spanish and use chat or Google Translate to translate it out, so the crew actually understands what they need to be doing and that sort of thing. And then you have a photo record of everything that's happened. So if I have an OSHA inspection, all those pictures I take will be taken on Company Cam to match theirs, so it shows exactly the date and time where it was taken and that sort of thing. And in the 4.5 years I've been at White Castle, I've taken 13,000 pictures, and not one of them has to stay on my phone.
Nice. And that the superintendents are taking pictures at different stages of the project.
Every time they do a site visit, they're going to take pictures of progress, of any issues that come up, of what needs to be done, and you can upload. So I can take a screenshot of our fall protection plan, and I can highlight it on it and put it on there so that when Juan shows up with a job, Juan sees, hey, Alex wants us to wear this fall protection setup in this area. Mm-hmm. So it allows everybody to have access to things, so that way you don't got to worry about sticky notes or photos on your phone or sending things to people.
Right.
Everybody can see what's going on.
And every time they're taking a photograph, they're actually evaluating and considering what it is they're going to be making permanent for you to see. Yep. So it just kind of heightens that.
It's funny, they'll take pictures and I comment on it, and I'm like, there was one with one of the general contractors, one of the guys who was pissed off that he was having to load sandbags on the roof for ballast. So he took a picture, and one of the guys was standing outside the warning line, and I was just about to comment to him, and I got a call from the safety guy from that general contractor, hey, Alex, I'm out at this middle school. And I'm going to go, yeah, you're talking about Jermaine with this guy outside the warning line? He goes, how'd you know? I said, because he took a picture of it himself. It's there, and then sometimes they tell on themselves, or I'll get a text message from somebody like you, like, hey, Alex, I saw this guy at one of your job sites. You send me a picture of it. I'll put it on company cam, and the crew will wonder how I found out already. And I'm like, there's eyes a lot more than you think.
That's right. That's cool.
Why aren't you guys sending me those messages? I don't understand.
Right. Anything else that you've seen that you think is worth sharing with the group? It is really interesting. There's some really amazing stuff. I'm thrilled and terrified at the same time because, I'm obsolete. But I think things are getting better, and I like the direction things are going.
We just got to put the new OIS update in. Doug, you would get to go.
Does anyone have any questions that you would like to pose to the group? Anything in particular that you would like just to open discussion on, or any challenges that you're having, or anything like that?
I have one for you, Matt.
Think about it.
You're not supposed to ask me any questions.
No questions can be asked. Can you shed any light on, now I'm talking specifically to temp lighting and what that looks like, and I'll leave it a little bit vague, but when we install that, kind of high level, what are some things that a COSHA would look at as they do an inspection, and let's say we're focusing strictly on temp lighting, temp power, that kind of stuff?
Well, they don't look directly at the light.
They don't look into the light.
Run away from the light?
That did not come from me.
I have a feeling, Casey, that you queued this up somehow.
I did not.
Teed that one up for the next...
I teed that one up for me because I got some questions because I see, a couple deconflicting things, and I've been to some of the similar classes that you guys have been to, and what I see in field. So I'm kind of curious what, those guys, the electricians, go to school for that and what they are taught versus what we're taught and kind of what I see. So...
Well, we could talk for an hour about generalization. Yeah. So if you've got something specific,
is there something in particular that
specifically about light strings? Mm-hmm. How do I make those? Protection of lights, and then any junction-esque boxes and things like that would be used to drive. Let's say I had a junction box right here as an example, or wire nuts, or what should that look like?
Well, there's two different things. You're going to have to look at the OSHA standard and the National Electric Code. It's going to tell you how wiring is supposed to be designed. Take the temp light string aspect out of it and just go with a temporary power string of any type. It's supposed to originate and terminate in a box. If you're going to have any kind of splices in there, there's rules that talk about the strength of the splice, meeting the manufacturer's original integrity. So there's all those aspects of the 305, 303, 304, flip up to the construction side, the same group essentially, but in the 400 series, to talk about how wiring is supposed to be installed. And we're talking about pages upon pages of electrical standards. So for me to sit down and say, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z and you'll be fine, I can't
wire
do that.
nuts acceptable?
It depends on how they're being utilized. So you can't just, if you're gonna run a string and you're just gonna wire nut two together and then have it hanging there, you're creating strain against where those wire nuts are located. So they're supposed to be inside of a box to prevent that strain from existing. But again, that could vary depending upon the environment that it's in, how it's installed. Is it being supported properly? Is it just a temp? Is it long-term temp? Is it permanent? So there's a lot of different factors that are come into play.
Metal box suspended in the air, acting as a junction, right? What would we look at, and what concerns would we have when we look at that and we process that information?
So basically the same you would have with any other electrical installation. So if you've got wires coming into both sides, are they protected from any kind of abrasion? So you've got to have the appropriate connectors for the wires coming in. When they're connected on the inside of the box, how are they being connected? There's all kinds of different apparatus now that you can use to splice wires together inside of a box, especially if you don't have another fixture that's located within the box. So if it's just wire to wire, there's quite a few different UL-approved apparatus now for connecting those wires. You can still go with the tried and true, spin them, wire nut them, connect them, because they're inside a box, and strain relief is provided by those abrasion devices that are on either side of your junction box. The junction box itself has to be supported appropriately. You can't have it just like wire to wire, so we use a junction box to connect them. The boxes have to follow the UL listing and labeling requirements as outlined in 303 and 403. So, all those basic wiring design functions are going to come into play. If you want to go ahead and bring the temp light aspect into this as well, now you're talking about having temp lights installed along that same wire. They've got to be suspended and supported in the same fashion. There is one of the few remnants in the OSHA standards that still specifically points towards temporary light strings that says you have to hang them by the appropriate hook on the housing. You can't just have them dangling there. You can go back and a lot of folks confuse this. You go into the maritime standard where it talks about shipbreaking, shipbuilding. The 1915 standard has a specific reference to caging lights to prevent them from being broken and whatnot. On our side of the house, it's more about if you have a bulb break, does it expose the live parts within? That was a much bigger issue with incandescent lights because you had the filaments sticking out and they were 120 volts on the string. Or industrial lighting in some cases because people run industrial lights at 277 on the inside for temps. So when you're starting to look at the temp light strings we see now, Casey and I have had this discussion many times, which is why I figured Casey teed this one up. You start talking about the use of an LED instead of an incandescent, are the hazards the same? Because you go buy an LED bulb, they're not glass, they're plastic. You take the plastic housing off of the top of the bulb, and you're not looking at a filament. You're looking at just one little LED or two little LED chips that are in there. That you hit them with power, they illuminate, and we get great vision in the zone that we're standing in. The problem is you pop that out of the way, and you're back to that 120 volt issue again. So it's never a cut and dry issue. You can just sit back and say, do X, Y, and Z, you'll always be fine. It's the construction world, even when it comes to temp wiring, which is why there's separate temp wiring standards, is dynamic, and everything changes all the time on a job site. Casey as a general contractor can go out on a job site on Tuesday, take a week off, come back the next Tuesday, and nothing looks the same. How was that for a very round-the-world, inarticulate, semi-articulate response that gives you not a true answer to what you're looking for? Because I still don't know what question you're really trying to ask me.
Well, without a photo, it's tough to show you, right? But you touched on it a little bit where, wire comes in, we secure it, we protect it from, abrasions and
strain.
And that type of thing, right? And strain relief, yep. So now I got a metal box. Is there any concern with that metal box that's just hanging in the air? You talked about properly supporting. Is that I hang it with rope or a bungee or whatever, is that acceptable? Or since I'm an electrician, I just strip some Romex and I hang it up that way. Is that acceptable, or does that have to be secured?
With the junction box, are supposed to be attached.
It goes back to listed, labeled, and certified.
So UL listing, right?
Yep.
I always thought that had to be secured, but
yeah, if you think about a junction box, if you have it just swinging there and you take wires into either side and you secure them using traditional wiring clamping devices on the box, and then it sits there and swings back and forth, what's happening to the wire in the clamping device? You've just basically moved your issue from inside of the box to outside of the box. So you've got to make sure that the box is utilized in the way it's required under 303, 403 for listing labeling, and then you got to make sure that the wires that you're using, because if you run up there with typical Romex wiring, you're going to use it for temporary wiring as opposed to the alloys that are different for like an extension cord or a true flexible cord. You keep bending Romex and the copper inside of it is going to break a lot faster than an extension cord because the alloys are different. They're much more malleable and flexible. So you create a whole different set of issues if you don't support it and make sure that it meets all the requirements for how far you go between attachment points and is it inside a conduit, is it outside a conduit. So there's a lot of factors that come into play.
Outside Romex outside, and I just run from one light to the other light to the other light, let's say they support every 10 feet like they're supposed to, acceptable?
Are you talking about a citation?
Well, just like
is this something that was an issue that was cited or something?
No, I would have a little bit more specifics than that. I'm just kind of generalizing, right? Because I see.
And I would tell you to deal with the area director that issued the citation.
Yeah, I was going to say, if this is based on a citation, there's no way that we're going to be able to.
No, I'm just generalizing, right? Because I see so many different things, right? I see guys that are running, it's a flexible cord set, but they put it together with wire nuts. And then I see where they got Romex and it's together with wire nuts. And then you see the ones they go into a four-way, or what would be a four-way, but it's all, capped off. Yeah. And then we just continued the light string around. How do I prove or not prove that that's UL listed to do that, right? So my question was, what are the concerns with that and the supporting of it, right? Because I'm always of the mindset that needs to be secured, right, to prevent that abrasions, to prevent the nuts from falling off, no pun intended since we're in the ball shack, but
we should point out for anyone who listens
to this
podcast,
leaning over a plate of nuts, in fact. So
these references that we're making with regards to the ball shack, it's the restaurant, it's not us.
I used to cite it for when they weren't secured. I cited that all the time. But I will say, I was with OSHA for 17 years. I had two area directors, Ben Baer and Bonita Winningham. I don't know if you remember either of them. Matt is the only area director, perhaps within the agency, that could actually address this question, because I don't know an area director that would know, first of all, what subpart we were talking about and be able to make specific standard references. So most of what he does is just like whip these guys at this point, and you know what I'm talking about. So it's incredibly difficult to talk in specifics when you don't deal in specifics very much anymore.
Well, and the more time I'm
not really his
away from the field, the more challenging it becomes.
Yeah, no doubt. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Right, I understand wire nuts are wrong. I'm just asking for clarification for everybody else watching or listening. Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
And then, does the box need to be then secured in some fashion?
Secured in some fashion, and it needs to be closed.
Yeah.
The whole intent of that is to prevent the fire from escaping so fast that you can't put it out.
Okay.
Because if you've got a ball of wire inside the box on the ceiling, no cover, starts fire, it starts dripping molten plastic, molten copper, down to the carpet. If it's in that box, that's not going to happen. More likely, it's silk or just smoke.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
So fire prevention is one aspect of it.
Interesting. I did not realize that. But
when you look at the OSHA standards and the National Electric Code, most of those standards are written not to protect the person per se. The NEC specifically is to protect the system. There are certain aspects of the OSHA standard that also protect the person as well. When you start talking about ground fault circuit interrupters, that 100%, you're talking the milliamp level that a GFCI trips at is so low, it has almost nothing to do with the integrity of the system. It has everything to do with protecting the person. One of the phrases I hear since we decided to dance in subpart S and talk about electrical, one of the things I can't stand hearing is when people start talking about, oh, well, we've got a circuit breaker, we'll be fine. There's a 5 times rule on a circuit breaker. Square D's got a book they put out that tells you that if you've got a 20 amp breaker, that it actually won't do an instantaneous trip until you hit the 5 times rule, which is 100 amps.
100 amps, yeah.
Well, I don't know too many folks that can handle a 100 amp shot. You're talking about an instantaneous trip, that's a lot of amperage. And when you're really talking about physiological effects, detrimental physiological effects at 1/4 of an amp to 1/2 an amp, that circuit breaker is doing nothing for me. But what it is doing is it trips before the wires start to melt, before the outlet that I've got my plug in that's not completely seated and the resistance starts to build up. That's what that's protecting. So, it's important that we understand when we're looking at the standards that there's some of these are twofold and some of these are primarily, especially with the NEC, they're system-based. So when you start talking about things like, well, what about the wire nuts, or what about how it's being suspended? Okay, well, fire is a big issue because what happens, you have indirect issues there. If I've got a building on fire, that means all my occupants are in danger too. But there's also that issue if this starts to occur and I touch a part of one of those components, how far is that electricity traveling where it's not supposed to be, that now it can touch me as well. Dirty insulation is something that cracks me up when people talk about, oh, the insulation's intact, it's all great. I'm like, is it really? Because dirt on the outside of the insulation right there, believe it or not, will carry current too. And it doesn't take a whole lot of amperage to do some damage. So you got to make sure we go back to inspecting and understanding what we're looking at. It always comes back to training. You got to train your folks to make sure they understand.
Yeah. We are up on time. Hours go by so quickly that we have filled our hour and then some. Does anyone have any last thoughts or a question before we wrap things up? All right. Any final words, parting thoughts? I'll give everybody just a couple of minutes, if you would. Ezra, Casey, anything that you, is there hope?
We've come a long ways in the last 20 years.
Yeah, haven't we, though? I would agree. Just you and I, we've evolved to some degree.
Yeah, if you're not evolving, you're dying, right? So
Right.
I was just going to say, if you have drones, you also need insurance, and I know a guy. So
Nice. Very good. Alex?
Matt, if there's one thing, if you were to be able to gather every contractor in the state in a room like this, if there's one thing you could point out that you'd like to tell everybody, what would it be?
Quit trying to memorize the OSHA standards and just look for the things that are dangerous.
That's a great comment.
The thing about being a safety professional, at any level, I don't care if you're an entry-level supervisor who wants to do it as additional duty, or you're the person that is in charge for a multi-million-dollar company that's got 5,000 employees. It sometimes is just as simple as look for the darn things that are dangerous. I tell anyone who comes to work for OSHA, and especially now with the position I hold, that when you walk in, I'm going to say, you're going to go to school, you're going to go to the OSHA Training Institute, you're going to hear all kinds of things, but man, just walk into a room and look for the things that look like they just don't look right. And you're going to strangely find that there's going to be some writing somewhere that says you shouldn't do this. Thou shalt not touch the hot electrical part. It'll be written in there. So just look for the stuff that's dangerous and then address the stuff that's dangerous.
Yeah, that's a better starting point than just trying to be compliant. Find the hazards, fix the hazards.
keep your people safe.
Keep your people
when
safe.
When you do that, you'll achieve compliance.
I think,
Weird how
yes,
that works.
Becoming compliant after that is much easier than starting the other way around, I think.
Don't get me wrong, you still have to learn the books so that you understand what's required in a program and how to build your training programs and all those other things. But, man, the basics of this, it's all about finding the stuff that's going to hurt you. If you're working with chemicals, you better read about those darn chemicals and figure out what's in them that could possibly get out and do some damage.
Right.
So, what's the hazard?
No doubt.
Crazy.
Well, that's exactly right. I had a trainer when I was with OSHA. One of my trainers was a guy named Seth Burmeister, and he would make me write up his cases. We'd go out together, and then I'd have to write everything up, and I'd cite everything I could find and think of, and he would cross it out with a red pen. He goes, "What's the hazard here? What's the hazard?" There's no hazard here, and so that was kind of the origin of the podcast to begin with. But I want to thank everybody on the panel. I want to thank Sheila. Thank you for having us. Dylan and Cam in the back, who I'm sure are sound asleep at this point. Thank you, guys. And thanks for having us out here. It's been a pleasure. And if you want to make a pass in front of the camera really quickly so you can see yourself on YouTube tonight, feel free to do that. We'll leave it on for a few minutes so you can say hi to the kids.
Hi, Mom.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.